No one ever knew what I kept inside that metal suitcase. There are names that die twice, once on the battlefield and once in silence. Today, for the first time, I've decided to open it. My name is Margaret Louise Everett. I'm 84 years old, and I live in a tiny nursing home tucked away in rural Alabama, where the windows creak louder than the visitors talk. I grew up between sewing needles and Sunday sermons, but at 22, I joined the military as a nurse, going against everything I was told a woman should be. I was never called a mother, never called a wife, never called a hero. But I was the last confidant of over 200 goodbyes no one wanted to hear. I carry with me a suitcase that was never searched, a brooch no one sees anymore, and a stained handkerchief full of promises that never made it into Sunday prayers. My body may be fragile, but my story still beats. And now, finally, it will be told. Sit here with me, sweetheart. This story, it's not easy to tell. But if you take a deep breath and listen with your heart wide open, maybe you'll hear more than just words. Maybe you'll hear the voices the world tried to silence. That's all I ask. Stay with me till the end. If this story stirs something you've kept buried for too long, then subscribe to the channel, like this video with tenderness, and share it with someone who's been carrying too much silence inside. Because today, I don't want to remember alone. I always knew my name was a pause. In that old peeling church with benches that creaked louder than our voices, women didn't have names. They had roles. So-and-so's daughter. So-and-so's wife. The deacon's sister. When someone said Margaret Louise Everett, it was always in a whisper, like speaking something forbidden. I was never a sin, but I was treated like one. Sunday mornings were parades of veils and silence. Mama would spend hours ironing my dresses, always below the knee, no cleavage, no color. The only blue allowed was the sky, and even that, sometimes, felt too bold for me. Prayer started at 9 sharp, but I learned early that the most important words were the ones you weren't allowed to say. The preacher spoke of submission with a booming voice, while the women lowered their eyes like they agreed. I pretended to listen, but inside something throbbed. It wasn't faith, it was fire. I grew up with the hum of sewing machines louder than the Psalms. I was good with a needle. That's what they used to say, proudly. This girl's got blessed hands, but around there, blessed meant obedient. Marry young, bear children, be quiet, but useful. Once my grandma whispered that she'd been a midwife. I helped bring life into this world, but no one ever let me choose mine, she said, stitching a white sheet. I never forgot that. At 22, the world started shouting louder than my father's voice, and for the first time, I listened. On the night before the spring service, I folded my Sunday dress and packed it into a plain bundle. I took my mother's handkerchief, the one embroidered with blue flowers, the one she wore to funerals. It was the only piece of her I wanted to carry, even knowing she'd never understand. I didn't say goodbye. I just left a short note on the living room Bible. I'm going to care for those no one else will. Don't wait for me at lunch. And I left before the sun came up. The train to Atlanta left at 5:40 a.m. I was shaking harder than the rattling windows. I still remember the feel of that wooden bench, stiff cold. The whistle cut through the sky like it was screaming. She ran. But for me, it wasn't running. It was answering a calling. While others followed sermons, I followed wounds. At the recruitment station, I lied about my age. Said I had first aid experience, which wasn't exactly untrue. I knew how to stop bleeding from both needles and knives. They sent me south to a makeshift triage center. "You'll learn fast," said a nurse with a tired voice. I wanted to say I already knew how to be silent. I'd been rehearsing it my whole life. They gave me a thick cotton coat that smelled like old disinfectant and broken promises. And there, my real prayer began. Stitched with scalpels, trembling hands, and eyes that couldn't see anymore. It was a liturgy without an altar, but filled with bodies waiting for forgiveness. I understood their faith came from obedience. But mine was born from compassion for the scarred. It was wartime, but no one prepared me for the invisible wars. One time, the camp chaplain saw me writing on a folded piece of paper. "Writing down your sins?" he asked, laughing dryly. I told him I was noting the name of a boy who died without anyone to pray for him. He just shook his head. "That's not how you serve God, sister." And for the first time in my life, I answered, "Maybe God still needs to learn how to listen." He never spoke to me again. There was a red-headed boy, maybe 18, who came in with half his body burned. He grabbed my hand and whispered, "Tell Mama I was brave. Tell her I held on." I wrote it down. I wrote it all, even knowing no one would ever read that letter, even knowing it would never arrive. His pain became words, and those words saved me. Inside that suffocating tent, where the heat made your skin ache and the smell of blood clung to your nose, I started to understand what it meant to be a woman at war. It wasn't about medals. It was silent resistance. It was fixing a pillow before a final breath. It was holding on to a promise with fingers stained by gunpowder. It was saying, "You're not alone." Even when I was, even now, sometimes I still feel that heat on my shoulders. Like the tent's still there, like time never passed. When I close my eyes, I hear the soft thud of boots on canvas, stifled sobs, the voices of those praying not from faith, but from fear. These are the memories I stitch into myself like embroidered scars. That first night in camp, I knelt by my makeshift bed and tried to pray, but no words came out. There was a knot in my throat. Sunday prayers didn't fit in my mouth anymore. "Lord, protect my soul," I whispered. And then I stayed silent, because I realized my soul was already in that field, now sitting in this creaky rocking chair that sounds just like those old church benches. I wonder, does anyone from that little town still remember me? Does my name still echo through the stuffy hallways of that congregation? Or was I just another woman who disobeyed? But maybe that's for the best, because the Margaret they wanted died the day I boarded that train, and the one born after. She learned to hear forgotten heroes, to write stories no one wanted to read, to believe that even late justice is still justice. Maybe one day someone will open this letter and realize that even before I went to war, I was already living in trenches, invisible ones, stitched with fear and faith. Maybe they'll discover that my nurse's story didn't start on a battlefield, but in the silence of a prayer that never welcomed me. I'll still tell you about the smell that never left my hands. But today I just wanted someone to know that even before the war, I was already fighting. No one ever taught me what to do when blood isn't just red, but memory. They say we get used to everything, but no one gets used to the smell of burnt flesh mixed with ether, sweat, and despair. My hands shook so much during that first week at camp that I had to wrap my own fingers just to look steady. The head doctor looked at me with disgust. Either you stop trembling, or you stop serving. I swallowed hard and kept going. The triage tent was a place where the living and the almost dead blended together like voices in a broken choir. Canvas overhead, mud below. The ground was so wet it sometimes felt like death was crawling up from the earth into your skin. Nothing there was permanent. Not even time. There are sounds that still haunt me. A dragging moan from a stretcher under, a sheet, the clink of a scalpel tossed into a metal bowl, and the one that tore me apart the most, the sudden silence. When someone stopped screaming, it was the end. I learned to tell the screams apart. The ones from physical pain came from deep in the gut. The ones from regret, those were soft, like the body already knew no one was listening. One of the boys, we called them all that, even the ones in their 30s, grabbed my hand and whispered, "Tell me someone will remember." I just nodded. But in that moment, I knew I had to do more than clean wounds. I had to remember names. So I started writing. Not out of duty, not even out of compassion, but out of a kind of desperation, because I couldn't stand the thought of those voices disappearing with the hot wind of the helicopters. I'd tear scrap paper from old reports and scribble with a stubby pencil, the kind we used to mark fevers. Each letter came out between sobs. Some started with "Mom," others with "Love of my life," and many ended in silence. When words failed, they used their eyes. And I wrote the rest. The letters couldn't be sent. Some were illegible. Others held secrets only meant for the edge of death. One boy, Joe, could barely speak. All he said was, "Don't leave my dog alone." I wrote that down, and then, without knowing why, I added, "He liked to fall asleep listening to the radio." I never knew if it was true, but it felt right. And that's how my hands started carrying more than just tools. They carried stories. The problem was, the blood wouldn't wash off. I scrubbed, soaked, rinsed with boiling water. But it lingered. In my skin, in my thoughts, in the air. A sharp, sweet, metallic smell. Sometimes it woke me in the middle of the night like someone had spilled the past on my pillow. Captain Anne, one of the few who still smiled, once told me, "You need a ritual, something to cleanse you from the inside." I started using vinegar. I'd soak my mother's handkerchief and rub my wrists. The sting felt like penance. Like I was apologizing for not being able to forget, because forgetting would feel like betrayal. One day, a sergeant with a deep chest wound grabbed my arm and said, "Don't write to her. She buried me a long time ago." But that night, I dreamed of a woman in a blue dress opening a letter, crying silently, and I realized even those who don't want to be remembered still want to be understood. I don't have children. Never did. But there was something motherly about sitting beside a dying body and asking, What do you want someone to say for you? Some apologized, others asked for forgiveness. Once a boy named Billy whispered, "Tell my dad I wasn't a coward," and then closed his eyes before he could finish the sentence. That time I cried in front of everyone. I didn't say sorry. I didn't look away. I just held his hand until it went cold, as if his courage might pass into me. Those were my forgotten heroes. Not the generals, not the decorated ones, but the ones who gave me their last words, like flowers left on a grave. Even now, 60 years later, when I water the flowers on the nursing home porch, I still catch that scent. Blood and ether. And for a moment I'm back in that tent, where sunlight slipped through canvas seams and lit up pale faces. It was brutal and beautiful. Someone once told me wars end, but that's not true. They just change shape. Today my war is against forgetting. I still have the letters. No one knows. They're hidden where no one ever looks. Sometimes, after the nurses leave, I pick one at random and read it out loud. Dear Mary, I'm sorry I didn't make it home. Keep that record we bought. I loved you the best way I could. I sign it with the dead boy's initials, and then, deep inside, I say goodbye like it was mine. Late justice may never come, but these letters, they're my protest, my altar. One night, during a bout of insomnia, I wrote a letter to myself. Margaret, it said, you exist too. You're not just the one who listened, you're the one who lived it. I still keep that letter. I'm still waiting. And soon, I'll tell you about the suitcase no one ever dared to open. There was a time I thought pain could be folded, like a dirty dress tucked into the bottom of a suitcase until you get back home. But some pain is made of iron. I bought the suitcase in a dusty village in southern Vietnam, right near where the helicopters dropped off their last screams. It was rusted metal, heavy even when empty. The vendor looked at me like I was strange. There's nothing worth keeping in there, ma'am, I simply replied. That's exactly why. I paid for it with a brooch I no longer had the right to wear. The red cross pinned to the pocket of my coat, already too stained to stand for purity. By then my body was tired, but my soul felt like it was just beginning. I had over 100 notes tucked away, some in the pockets of my uniform, some stitched between linings, some folded into the seams of my clothes. Many were scribbled in blood, others faded by sweat and time. None could be delivered. None could be thrown away. That's when I realized I wasn't just a nurse. I was a cemetery for words. I kept everything inside that suitcase. Every letter folded 3 times. Every name underlined. Inside it were eyes that never closed. Mothers who never knew. Loves that never got to say goodbye. It became my second soul. An iron soul, heavy with the voices that didn't survive the way to the helicopter. The suitcase stayed under my bed, in the tent where 5 women slept and none of us dreamed anymore. No one opened it. No one asked. In the middle of a war, everyone has a secret, and mine was made of paper. During inspections, the officers checked everything. Medicine, syringes, even shoes. Once they asked to see my purse. I opened it, showed handkerchiefs, a small Bible, an old photo of my mother sewing. But no one ever asked to see the metal suitcase. It was too heavy for curiosity. And I learned to hide my pain in the things no one dares to touch, in what looks useless. Sometimes I'd wonder, what if it gets lost? What if they take it? What if they find out? But my biggest fear wasn't that. It was that no one would care enough to open it. I brought the suitcase back home with me. They told me I could check it as a personal item of emotional value. I laughed inside. They had no idea they were carrying over 200 goodbyes. That inside, under worn-out clasps and rusted hinges, was the last breath of soldiers no one remembered. When I arrived back in the US, no one searched me. Not my body, not my story. My father picked me up at the station, barely looked me in the eye, just said, "Let's go." In the car, the radio played football scores and election promises. No one asked what I'd been through. No one wanted to hear about blood. They just wanted me to be Margaret again, the one who sewed curtains and smiled politely. But that Margaret, she stayed at the edge of that field, and the one who came back, she needed silence to breathe. I hid the suitcase in the back of the guest room closet, the room no one's entered since 1973. Covered it with old quilts, the ones my mother embroidered with flowers and never used. Told the family it was war junk. They nodded with that kind of dismissiveness people reserve for things without resale value. They never mentioned it again. But I do. I speak to it every night. Wipe its surface with a clean cloth, like someone tending a grave. I sit at the edge of the bed and listen. Listen even when everything is quiet, because there are sounds that stick to your bones, like the sound of paper folding before death, like the sound of a boy's last staggered breath, like the sound of my own heart, still beating to the rhythm of unsent promises. Once I dreamed the suitcase opened on its own, and all the letters flew around the room, sticking to the walls, the ceiling, the mirror. I woke up crying, and for the first time I thought, what if they're still alive? What if every word inside is still waiting to be heard? I went days without opening it again, like I was afraid to face the eyes I left behind. But the suitcase never turned its back on me. It's strange to think an object can carry so much life. But inside, there are names, there are dates, there are secrets whispered in fever, there are apologies, there are wishes that never came true. There are boys who called out for mothers who never heard them. And there's a space, a small empty space, right in the center of the suitcase. That's where I kept the one note that wasn't dictated, the one I wrote to myself. Margaret, Louise Everett, if one day you forget who you were, open this. And remember, you survived everything, even being forgotten. No one asks me anymore what I brought home from the war. They think I came back with wrinkles and old stories. But I came back with 200 folded lives in an iron box. I came back with voices no one wanted to hear. And that's why I write. I write so they don't die all the way. I write because maybe, one day, someone will open that suitcase and understand that women in war are living tombs too, that our hands bury as well, but our words, they resurrect. Soon I'll tell you about the brooch, the tiny symbol no one sees anymore, but still shines on my chest like it's whispering. You did what no one else had the courage to do. And today I close the suitcase slowly, like closing a book that's still being written. I still have it. It doesn't shine like it used to, that's true. But it's still here, on the left side of my chest, stitched quietly into the lining of one of my floral dresses. A small metal brooch with a red cross. They gave it to me in the 3rd month of the war, when, according to the officers, I had fulfilled my nursing duties in a hostile combat zone with honor and extraordinary resilience. They said, with honor, but they forgot to say, with trauma. At the makeshift ceremony, if you can even call it that, they handed us the brooches along with a pat on the back and an empty phrase, "You make us proud." But that same night I had to clean up the remains of a 17-year-old boy who died trying to protect the platoon's dog. That was my pride, crossing the field with my head held high, even when my eyes weighed like lead. When the war ended, I tucked the brooch away with the letter I never finished, a letter to myself. It said something like, "If one day you forget who you are, touch this metal, it remembers." From that point on, I never wore the brooch like a medal again. I started sewing it inside my clothes, hidden, close to my heart, like a scar molded in steel. Coming home was a ritual with no altar. I stepped off the train with a metal suitcase, a stained handkerchief, and a body that no longer felt like mine. I expected a banner, maybe even a look of recognition. I got silence and judgment. "You came back alone?" was the first thing I heard, as if that were some kind of moral failure. To the town, I was too much of a woman. No man, no children, wrinkles that didn't match my age, eyes that looked too far into the distance. The brooch, that tiny piece of metal, became my way of remembering that what I lived through, no one could erase, even if they tried. I cut up my old uniforms and turned them into pillowcases. I couldn't bear seeing those white, now gray, clothes treated like rags. Turning them into something that offers comfort, even if just to a tired head, was my quiet form of resistance. But the brooch, I didn't transform it. I didn't hide it in the back of a drawer. I didn't throw it out. I didn't give it away. It stayed with me, silent, solid, cold. Even now, when I slip on my cotton floral dress and feel the metal against my skin, it's like I can hear all the voices again, the muffled screams, the words whispered through fever, the names choked between sobs, the "I'm sorry," the "don't let her forget me," the "tell Mama I tried." That brooch knows it all. One time, my niece saw it pinned to a scarf. She said, "That's from the war, right, Auntie?" I said yes. She laughed like she was looking at an old toy. "Funny. Seems way too small to carry all the stuff you talk about." I smiled, because she had no idea how much weight fits in something the size of a button. The truth is, there are things only metal understands, only silence recognizes, only a chest that's bled on the inside knows how to carry. On Sundays, when I sit on the garden bench at the home where I live now, I run my finger across the brooch without anyone noticing. The other ladies talk about grandkids, recipes, television, me. I talk to a piece of war sewn into my chest. This brooch saw things no altar would accept. It was with me when I held the head of a boy singing a hymn before he died, when a doctor screamed at me to hold pressure, but my hands were already holding a soldier's last letter, written in pieces, when my own faith cracked in two and I had to choose between saving a body or saving his voice. These were war times no one remembers anymore. Times of women at war, who were never called warriors. The brooch is the only medal I ever received, and maybe the only one I never gave back. One day, a worker at the home asked what that was on my chest, said it looked like a sewing pin. I told him, "It's just a reminder." He asked, "Of what?" And I said, "That I'm still here. Because that's what it is deep down. Not a symbol of service, but a quiet statement of presence, a metallic scream stitched into a flower. It's strange to think that now all I have left of the past are such small things. A brooch, a handkerchief, a suitcase, a notebook full of letters, and the tired heart of someone who saw too much and said too little. But maybe that's what keeps me alive. The little things no one sees. The proof the world forgot, but time still respects. Soon I'll tell you about my family and what was lost the moment I tried to speak. But today the brooch is here, shining quietly, like a whisper against forgetting. They say war changes people, but no one told me that sometimes the ones who change the most are the ones who stayed. When I came back, I expected to find something untouched. A chair still in the same place, a dusty photo on the shelf, a hand on my shoulder, even if shaky. But what I found was silence, and not the sacred kind that comforts you, the kind that screams. My father met me on the porch, leaning against the door frame like a customs officer. "You took your time," he said. He didn't ask if I'd eaten. He didn't ask if I'd seen death. He didn't ask anything. He just grabbed my suitcase like it was an object from another planet. And I suppose I was. My mother looked at me with the eyes of someone who still had faith. Just not in me. She made the sign of the cross and said, "Time to settle down, now. You should think about getting married." Like marriage was the cure for the death I carried in my wrists. Like a wedding ring could wash off the blood that even boiling water couldn't. My brothers. Oh, my brothers. They always said I was the odd one. That I spoke too softly, read too much, answered back when I should have stayed quiet. At my first lunch back home, they sat like it was a boardroom meeting. One of them asked, "So, bring anything useful back from over there?" I thought about answering, "Yes." I brought silence, which is the only thing you seem to value, but I bit my tongue, like always. I didn't tell them about the letters, about the folded notes inside the iron suitcase, about the names that still echoed in my ears, about the boy who died smiling because I told him his mother would be proud. They wouldn't understand. To them, heroism only counts if it wears a man's uniform. They said I came back incomplete, but the truth is, I came back too whole, and they didn't know how to handle that. I remember one night I tried to talk, tried to tell them about the day 3 boys came in, mangled, still calling for their parents. Said I wrote letters for all of them. That I stayed beside them until their last breath. And my mother said, "Why didn't you pray for them instead of writing? Their souls needed prayers." That's when I understood. It didn't matter what I had lived through. My experience didn't fit inside the frame of this house. There was no room for my pain, no room for my voice. From then on, I started talking to myself. Sitting in my old bedroom between the closet and the locked suitcase, I wrote everything I couldn't say out loud. Conversations with ghosts, letters with no address, stories that had beginnings and ends but never a middle, because the middle was where my family silenced me. One Sunday, I asked my mother if she'd go to church with me. She hesitated, said maybe it wasn't a good idea to draw attention. I thought she meant my uniform, but it was worse. She meant me. Around town, people whispered, "She's the one who served in the war, alone. They say she helped save soldiers, but she never married, right? Poor thing. Must have come back strange. The church didn't say my name. The pastor didn't mention me. Not a single prayer for those who served. Not a line. Not a whisper. Sitting on that pew, with the brooch hidden near my heart and my mother's handkerchief in my pocket, I realized I was alone, surrounded by people. But alone. I never went back. Since then, my family treats me like a guest, someone who stays in the back room, who joins the dinners but not the conversations, who helps with chores, but never shows up in the photo albums, faded, and over time I became a memory before my time. Today when I get Christmas cards, and there aren't many, they come with generic messages. Happy holidays, Aunt Margaret. No questions, no warmth, no story. But I do have a story. I have voices stitched into the seams of time. I have a suitcase that cries softly when the house goes quiet. I have letters addressed to mothers I never was, but who now live inside me. And maybe that's enough. Maybe my real family is made of farewells, of names written in pain, of silences shared with strangers who trusted me more than my own blood ever did. They didn't listen to me. Never did. But that never stopped me from speaking, even if only on paper. Even if only in thought. Soon I'll tell you about a love that didn't fit inside his letter. But today I write to remind myself, not every abandonment comes from outside. Sometimes it's the house that closes the door, and the suitcase that becomes home. Not all love begins with a touch. Some are born in the silence between two breaths, and die before we know where to keep them. His name was Robert, but I called him 532. It was the number stitched on the collar of his military shirt the day he came into triage, my third week at the field station. He had a deep wound in his right leg and eyes full of urgency. He didn't seem to know if he wanted to live or just stop fighting. He looked at me like he recognized someone from another life. He didn't apologize for bleeding. He didn't thank me when I cleaned the wound. He just said, "You've got hands that listen." And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly seen. During the 3 days he was under my care, we spoke very little, but there were pauses, and in those pauses the skin said what the mouth wouldn't dare. One night, as the tent trembled with the thunder of distant artillery, he took my hand. Not out of fear, but like someone holding on to a memory before it slips away. He looked into my eyes and whispered, "If I don't come back, tell her I understood." I asked, "Who is she?" He smiled with a touch of pain. "You'll know," he said, but he never explained. Hours later, his cot was empty. They rushed him out. The infection had spread. The helicopter was hit. He never came back. On the floor of the tent, I found the folded piece of paper he'd left beside his bed. Tell her I understood, that's all. I kept it more carefully than any other note, folded it 3 times, tucked it into the lining of my coat right over my heart. Sometimes I wonder, was he talking to me? Was I her? He never knew my name. But maybe he called me home. And that's how I began to become the address for letters no one knew where to send. His words never left me. In the years that followed, every time I held someone's hand as they passed, I thought of Robert, his quiet voice, his sharp stillness, his smile that didn't ask for permission. I never felt anything like it again. Not for lack of trying, but because there was never room. People here, they look at me like a cracked vase. They respect it, but never place flowers in it. At the home where I live now, there's a man named John who plays piano in the dining hall. Sometimes he smiles at me. He's even asked me to dance, but he doesn't understand the weight of my music. I belong to a time no one listens to anymore. And inside me, that note still lives. Tell her I understood. But what did he understand? Maybe the absurdity of war. Maybe the kind of love that doesn't need to last to be real. Or maybe he understood that dying with truth hurts less than living with lies. Today that letter sits among the others. But it isn't like the others. It's not a goodbye to a wife, a mother, or a brother. It's a half-open door, an echo without reply, a love that couldn't fit on paper. I tucked it at the bottom of the suitcase, but sometimes when I feel especially invisible, I pull it out and read it like it was written yesterday. Like time hadn't passed. Like Robert was still there, lying in that cot, eyes steady, saying my name without speaking. Maybe I loved. Maybe he did too. But we didn't have time to ache or to smile. We only had silence. And sometimes, silence is the truest love there is. When the nurse walks into my room and sees the letter in my hands, she sometimes asks, "Was he someone special?" I just answer, "He was someone who listened." And that, to me, is worth more than promises, because the love that didn't fit in his letter fit inside me, and soon. I'll tell you about the place where even the windows whisper. But today I still hear his voice between the sheets of memory. And it says softly, "You're not alone. Time doesn't pass here. It echoes." Every morning I wake up to the creak of a wheelchair in the hallway, the clatter of teacups being stacked faster than kindness allows, and the sound of the windows. These windows that don't open all the way, yet still find a way to whisper. I'm not sure when I started hearing them. Maybe during that first winter when I realized no one else was coming. Maybe the day I first put on this beige uniform. Not a nurse's coat, but a quiet signal that I'm a resident now, not a rescuer. Here we all have our rituals. Some tend to plants that never bloom. Others repeat the same stories every day to no one in particular. Me? I clean my suitcase with a white cloth, religiously, like someone tending a grave the world has forgotten. It lives beneath my bed, wrapped in an old sheet my mother embroidered. The last one she gave me before she called me, wayward. The iron suitcase doesn't shine anymore, but it still holds the names, the voices, the fever-whispered confessions. It's my second soul. Maybe the only one that still believes me. The other women talk about children, grandchildren, wedding anniversaries. I talk to paper, and sometimes to the wind, because there are nights when the breeze slips through the window cracks and brings back the muffled cries of the old triage tents. No one suspects a thing, not the nurses, nor the volunteers who smile out of duty. No one asks why I keep a hand-stitched notebook with yellowed pages and handwriting that still holds firm. No one touches the suitcase. No one notices the brooch sewn into the inside of my dress. But the windows hear me. When the sun hits the old wooden frame just right, I swear it projects shadows of who I once was onto the wall. Once I saw my silhouette reflected there, and for a moment I thought it was one of the triage girls. A shadow of myself, still waiting for someone to ask for help. But no one does, and life rolls on. Inside, the coffee is lukewarm. The visits are brief, and birthdays feel more like mourning than celebration. But there's something sacred about abandonment. Something cruel, yes, but also something painfully honest. The furniture creaks like the pews from my childhood church. The halls smell faintly of old lavender, like the past was bottled and misted into the air. And the stale breakfast bread reminds me of the days when chewing was survival, not pleasure. I like to sit near the east wing window. It's the only one that looks out onto a dirt road. Almost no one walks there. But now and then, I spot a truck, a lone dog, a child on a bike. And in those moments, I imagine maybe one of them will hear my story someday. Maybe they won't know it's mine, but they'll feel it. A new nurse asked the other day if I'd like to write a memoir. Said, war grandmas are becoming a trend, as if my pain were some kind of vintage accessory. I smiled, not out of bitterness, but because she doesn't understand that the memories I carry don't fit in a book. They fit in silence, in worn metal, in a sweat-stained piece of fabric, hidden in the folds of time. Sometimes I whisper the names from the letters. Margaret, Joseph, Paul, Anita, Sam. I say them slowly, like I'm inviting ghosts to dance, and the windows. Oh, they creak gently, like they're answering. Some nights I hear crying from down the hall. Maybe it's the woman at the end, the one who lost her son and never spoke his name again. Or maybe it's the echo of my own grief, bouncing off the thin walls of this place where old age feels like punishment. But even here, the suitcase stays closed, and the letters untouched. Because if someone ever asks, if someone ever dares to see past my wrinkles and my slow steps, I want to be ready. Ready to open, to show, to say, it's all here. It never left. Not long ago, one of the caregivers found a loose page on the floor of my room. It was yellowed, the handwriting crooked and smudged. She thought it was trash, was about to toss it. But I asked for it back. It was the letter of a 19-year-old boy who died calling for his mother. The same letter I'll read again in silence, staring out the window while the world forgets yet another day of who we were. Soon I'll tell you about those voices, the ones that still call me by name. But today, Today the windows are whispering again, and I swear I heard a voice say, "You're still here, nurse, and we still need you." I never thought I'd be remembered by those who left, and forgotten by those who stayed. There are nights when I open the suitcase just to hear the sound of the paper unfolding. It's a dry, scratchy sound, like each page is fighting against time. As if it's saying, I'm still here. And deep inside me, something always replies, so am I. Some letters call me by name, literally. Not my full name, but fragments. Dear Miss M. Margaret the nurse. You, the one who held my hand. And then I'm there again, in that tent, barefoot on damp ground, feeling the heat crawl up my legs as the world collapsed into my lap. Every word spoken at death's door became a sentence. And now, all these years later, they've become a mirror. I read one yesterday that said, "Don't let her forget my name." And I cried, not for him, but because no one's ever said that about me. I spent a lifetime holding hands, closing eyes, writing farewells that weren't mine. But no one ever said, "Don't let Margaret disappear." My name isn't on monuments. It's not in books, not in my family's memories, not in the church's records. But it's here, between shaky lines, scribbled in urgency, written by cold fingers. Margaret. Sometimes Margie, other times just the girl with kind eyes. And that's how I know I existed. The letters aren't just memories, they're keys. Open doors to who I was, to who I still am. They call me back, as if afraid I'll also slip away without being heard. I keep some in a separate bundle, the ones that hit different. One ends with, "Tell Margaret she's the reason I held on one more night." Another begins, "If I'd ever known my mother, I'd want her to be like you." I read those on birthdays, mine and theirs, when I remember. Yes, I remember them, even though the world rushed to forget, even though people talk more about who led the war than about those who fought it on their knees, in the mud, just begging for their names to be remembered. I am made of those voices, and sometimes I wonder, did they know when they wrote that they were shaping me? That every letter made me more than a daughter, more than a nurse, more than a veteran. Maybe that's why, when they call my name now, here at the home, cold and rushed, I take a moment to answer. Because that's not how they used to say it. They said, "Margaret," like a prayer. Like my name held some kind of salvation. And maybe it did. Maybe for a moment I was a sanctuary. But no one here understands that. The caregivers think I'm getting confused. Because sometimes they see me talking to myself. But I'm not alone. I'm answering letters. I say things like, "She would have forgiven you, yes. You were brave. Yes, I still remember your name. It's not madness, it's loyalty. Those boys, and girls too. Yes, there were a few. They were my temporary family, my community of goodbyes. And unlike my blood relatives, they listened. Even with broken bodies and blurry eyes, they listened to me. And I listened to every one of them. Some letters are stained, some are torn. There are pages that still carry the scent of ether, sweat, fear. But others carry courage, resilience, humanity. I kept them all, because they all call me The world may see an old woman sitting by a window, with trembling hands and slow steps, but what they don't see is the echo I carry in my chest, the echo of voices that don't want to vanish. And that's why I write. I write because as long as my name lives in those letters, as long as there's a single line that says, "Thank you, Margaret," then my story is still alive, not in awards, not in official records, but in confessions only. Death gave permission to speak. Soon I'll tell you about a visit, the only one I've had in years. She stayed for 14 minutes and saw nothing. But today I sit here, with the suitcase open, with my heart exposed, and with a quiet certainty. I was someone, and someone called me by name. It was a Tuesday in October when she came, the only visit in years. She arrived with a perfume that was far too sweet and a rushed smile. The kind you hand over along with your car keys, like there's no time to actually be present. My niece, daughter of my oldest brother, had called the night before saying she'd be passing through and would take the chance to stop by. I said I'd be glad, and I was, truly. Even knowing she wasn't coming for me, but for a vague memory of who I once was to the family. A delicate obligation, almost pity. She walked into the room like someone stepping into an antique store, full of objects she doesn't understand, but has to pretend to admire. She looked around, said the place was really clean, and asked if I watched TV. I said no, that I preferred to listen to the sounds outside. She laughed and said, "That's so you," though she's never really known me. She sat in the wicker chair by the window and crossed her legs, already impatient. "You never got married, right, Auntie?" she asked with that mix of curiosity and judgment. "I've never seen a photo of you with anyone. No boyfriends." I smiled. Not out of politeness, but self-defense. I told her I had plenty of people pass through my life, but maybe none of them managed to stay. She frowned. "But did you ever want kids?" I took a deep breath. I thought of Robert. I thought of every one of them. The ones who called for me in their final moments. I thought of the hands I held like borrowed sons, sons of war, sons of the world, and I simply said, "Sometimes life gives you motherhoods that don't fit inside family albums." She changed the subject like someone slamming shut a window that let in too much wind. Asked if I still remembered the war. "I think you were a nurse, right? Which war was it? Vietnam?" I nodded. She didn't know anything else. Didn't know about the smell of blood that never left my skin. Didn't know about the letters, the voices, the hidden suitcase, the men who died with their mothers' names on their lips. She didn't know that the red cross sewn to my chest was more sacred than any altar. I pointed to the brooch. It was discreetly stitched into the lining of my dress. I said, "It's all here." She looked, but she didn't see. Her eyes brushed past it like it was a stain. "Is that real?" she asked. "Just a decoration?" I said yes, just a decoration, because in that moment, I knew no explanation would make sense, that any word from me would be dismissed as the exaggerated nostalgia of an old woman who couldn't let go of the past. So once again, I went silent. She stayed for 14 minutes. I counted, talked about her new car, about the twins, about how busy life was, and how hard it is to fit everyone in. And I wondered, when did I stop being someone and become just another one? When did time sweep me from the center of conversation to the edge of family obligation? When did I become a visit stored for special occasions, a memory that only updates with the calendar? Before leaving, she stood up, kissed my cheek, and said it was nice seeing me. I thanked her, quietly, and when the door closed, I waited for something, anything, a sound, an echo, a whisper, maybe even a tear, but all I heard was my own sigh, short, tired, resigned. The kind you let out when you realize you've waited too long for something no one ever promised. Later that same day, I opened my suitcase, not out of anger, not even sadness, but with the kind of soft melancholy we reserve for the things that never disappoint us. I pulled out a fresh piece of paper, an old pen, and wrote a letter. For the first time, addressed to myself, Dear Margaret, today you had a visitor who saw nothing, didn't see the brooch, didn't see the cross on your chest, didn't see the hands that held lives, didn't see what you still carry. But you know, you've always known. And maybe that's enough. I folded it carefully, signed it like it came from another time, placed it among the others, and finally closed the suitcase. Soon, I'll tell you about the handkerchief that knows everything. But today, I'm left with the bitter truth that sometimes the most painful thing isn't being forgotten. It's being looked at directly and still not being seen. It's been with me from the beginning. Not the one from childhood, not the one for church or special occasions, but the handkerchief born with me in the war zone. I made it myself on a hot moonless night from scraps of my own nurse's coat, torn in secret under the flickering light of a tired military flashlight. I stitched it in the dark with thick thread and trembling fingers, a crooked, imperfect seam, but strong. It was my way of saying, I'm still here. A kind of silent protest, a prayer in cloth. It saw everything, absorbed more than most eyes dared to witness. Blood, sweat, tears that weren't mine, tears that fell on me when men gripped my hands and asked me to write one final sentence for someone who would never get to read it. It was with this handkerchief I wiped the forehead of a young man who trembled as if caught in some spiritual fever. It was with it I covered my face when the entire tent reeked of fresh death. It was with it I covered the eyes of an 18-year-old named Peter, who died smiling because I lied and told him his letter had been sent. I never let it go. Not even in the worst moments. Folded, it fit perfectly in the left pocket of my uniform, right over the heart, like an extension of my resistance. It was my invisible shield. And to this day, more than 6 decades later, I still carry it with me. Now faded, marked with stains, time never erased. And maybe they were never just stains. It smells like trenches, like the suffocating tent, like what was never said, never wept, never buried. No one here at the home knows what it means. They think it's just an old woman's habit, the kind of handkerchief people carry out of custom. A nurse once said, "You always carry that, don't you? It's kind of charming." I smiled, let her think so, because if she knew what it knows, if she knew what it's carried, Maybe she wouldn't be able to look at me the same way again. I don't wear it to accessorize. I wear it to remember, to wipe eyes no one sees tear up anymore. And when I fold it each night, I notice it fits perfectly inside a letter folded in 3, like a seal. A seal from someone who survived and never forgot. A seal that certifies the quiet pain of someone who had to keep walking without ever really being heard. This handkerchief is proof that not everything that saved us was noble or visible. Sometimes it was just fabric, just thread, just a square of hope folded between fingers. It followed me through every change. When I came home and was told it was time to get myself together, it was in my pocket. When my mother handed me floral dresses, as if color could cure trauma, it was folded alongside my hidden brooch. When I was called strange for not wanting weddings or parties, it was there, always there, silent and loyal. I've kept more than I should have in this life. Words, letters, glances, hands, secrets. But of all of them, this is what listened the most, what endured the most. And maybe that's why, when I'm alone in my room and lay it across my lap, I swear I can feel it pulsing, like it stored every heartbeat the world denied me. There are nights I hang it in the window and let the wind carry it. I sit and watch it like someone watching a grown child, ready to leave. But still inside the house, it dances in the air, light, but I know. It carries too much weight to ever disappear. Today, as I write, it's beside me, folded, silent, alert. Soon, I'll tell you about the day I left the suitcase open. But today I hold the handkerchief like I'm holding everything that was never said out loud. And I whisper, you know, you always did. It was yesterday, after 60 years, after hundreds of nights gently wiping the latch, folding each letter as if the air might bruise them, stacking them in silence like building a secret altar. I simply left the suitcase open. I don't know why. Or maybe I do. Maybe it was the way the day began, overcast but warm. Or maybe it was the dream from the night before, where I saw the letters flying, twirling through the room like paper birds, free, finally seen. Or maybe it was my body tired and quiet deciding for me, no more hiding. I got up slowly, my knees cracked like pages turned too quickly. I opened the window, smelled rain that never came. I walked to the bed, bent down with effort, and pulled out the suitcase. It made the same sound as always, part memory, part protest. And this time, I didn't lock it. I didn't arrange the letters neatly. I didn't hide the names. I just let it breathe. For the first time in 6 decades, it remained open, exposed, unprotected. The nurse walked in without knocking. One of the new ones. Young, far too light for this place where everything is heavy. She came to drop off my pills, but stopped. Her eyes landed inside the suitcase. She knelt down. With care, she picked up the top letter. Didn't ask permission. Just read, softly, almost like a prayer. It was the letter from a 19-year-old boy who died calling out for his mother. I remembered. His name. His hand too small. The way he clutched the handkerchief like it was a toy. When she finished reading, she stayed quiet for several long seconds, Then she stood. Her eyes were full. She whispered, "Thank you for keeping this," and left. She didn't ask where it came from. Didn't need to know who wrote it. But for the first time, someone saw, someone read, someone cried. I sat next to the suitcase for a long time. I didn't speak. I didn't cry. I just listened. Listened to the sound of memory opening. Listened to the suitcase breathe. Listened to the voices, all of them, thanking me in silence. Later, they came to change the sheets. Another staff member saw the suitcase. She didn't say a word, didn't touch it. But she left the room more slowly than usual, as if she knew this wasn't just rusted iron or stained paper. It was a tomb. It was an altar. It was an archive of souls. That night, I didn't close it, didn't lock it, didn't hide it. I went to sleep with the suitcase open, with my soul exposed, and with the quiet certainty that even without applause, even without glory, I had done something the world forgot to honor. I remembered. And sleeping with the suitcase open was like sleeping with the windows of the soul unlocked, without fear of being found, without shame for feeling too much, without guilt for having survived. Tomorrow they might go back to ignoring it. The suitcase may return to the dark under the bed. The days may resume their silence. But yesterday, the silence broke with a sob. And that, my dear, that is also freedom. Soon I'll tell you about the last piece of paper. The one that was never sent. The one where the sound of my own voice still echoes. Today I write as someone saying goodbye slowly. No ceremony, no flags, no funeral. Just me, this paper, and the echo that still lives inside it. There's no recipient, no date, no stamp. But there's a name at the top. Mine. Written in my own hand. Steady, as if time never managed to fold me. Margaret Louise Everett. It took me a long time to write to myself. I spent a lifetime being the hand that wrote for others. The one who caught the final words stuck in the throats of those who died too soon, who folded trembling notes and tucked them away like relics. But never, not once, had I written a letter with my own name at the beginning and the end. I was always the one who listened, the one who held space, the one who remembered for them. But today, I'm the one who needs to be remembered. I don't want flowers. I don't want a plaque with birth and death dates. I just want someone to know that somewhere, at some time, there was a woman who held 200 hands, and each one of them taught her to be more alive than any medal ever could. This letter has no embellishments, just small truths, the kind that hurt quietly. I write that I was born in a house where woman meant sewing and silence, that I was called wayward for choosing to serve lives instead of husbands, that I boarded a train at 22 and never returned the same, that my faith was shattered and stitched back together between tents and cries, that my love lasted 3 days and was buried without a name, that I never had children, but I mothered every pain that chose me as its final witness, that my suitcase holds the story of a country that never wanted to hear me, and that my brooch, still hidden over my heart, shines brighter than any stone-carved cross. I write all of it slowly, as if each word sews a part of me back into place. And as I write, I realize I'm not writing an ending. I'm writing a truth. I was. I will be. Even when my name fades from records, it will still be folded into the corners of these letters. Even when my voice goes quiet, it will still echo in the hands of whoever dares to open that suitcase. Even if no one ever calls me a hero, I was a sanctuary. Today, the home is quieter than usual. The rain falls gently, like it's washing only the outside. The window whispers, as always, and the handkerchief, oh, my old handkerchief, rests on the table folded carefully. It'll go with me, not to be displayed, but to keep telling the things no one ever wanted to hear. I placed this letter among the last in the suitcase. It's not the most important, but it's the only one, where the one who dies is me. And still, if you read it, you'll hear my voice again. Maybe that's why I wrote it more carefully, with more weight, with more truth. At the bottom of the page, I left a request. Nothing fancy, nothing solemn, just this. If you found this, please, don't forget my name. Read one letter, just one. Give someone what the world never gave me, listening. And then fold the paper with tenderness, like folding a person, because that's all I ever wanted. Not to be read by millions, but to be heard by someone. If this letter is in your hands now, my body may already be far away, but everything I was is still here, in the lines, in the dried tears, in the soft sound of paper touched with care. Today my suitcase is open, so is my soul, and in the silence after the last word, there's an echo. It doesn't shout, it doesn't cry, it whispers, "She existed." You know, sometimes silence isn't the absence of sound. It's weight. It's a suitcase shut for decades. It's a name no one says. It's faith that survived without an altar. The war took many things from me, but what hurt most was the time that came after. Time that passed as if I'd never been there, as if I hadn't written 200 goodbyes with my own soul. Today, I live in a quiet home. My window faces a dirt road no one really walks down anymore. But I still write. I still wait. And I still believe that listening to a story with your heart can change something. If you've made it this far, thank you. Thank you for hearing me without rushing. Thank you for letting me exist, even if only for a few minutes, on the other side of this screen. Take this story with you, and if you can, share it with someone else who carries forgotten memories too. Subscribe to the channel to hear more stories like mine. Stories no one wants to tell, but that need to be heard. And now, my dear, I can rest. Thank you for staying with me until the end. And if one day someone speaks my name again, let it be with tenderness until we meet again.